All right, well, let's get started. This is a planning committee for Thursday, April 28th. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. Kelly, can we do a roll call, please?
Councillor, excuse me, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Cloutier.
Present.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Menard. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Co-chair Moffat. I don't see him. Call. And co-chair Gower.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1, 2, and 4 to 9 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on May 11th, 2022, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest today? I am seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. We have the minutes of meeting number 59 on March 24th. That was a special meeting. That was for Manor Park, I believe, on March 24th. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. Minutes for meeting number 60, April 14th, 2022. These minutes were posted yesterday. Are those minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Confirmed, thank you. Also, I want to note the minutes of March 10th have been revised to include a correction, a dissent from Councillor Leeper on the OPA and zoning bylaw amendment for 112 Montreal Road and 314 Gardner Street. So need to mention that formally here. Okay, we're going to go through our agenda and see if any items can be carried by consent. If there are any committee members who wish to speak, or if we have any delegations registered for the items, we will hold them. So we'll begin with postponements and deferrals from previous meetings. The first item is a zoning bylaw amendment for 129 and 133 Catherine Street in Somerset Ward. We don't have any delegations who are registered. Are there any councillors? I'm not sure if Councillor McKenney is here. I have not seen Councillor McKenney. Are there any committee members who wish to hold this item? I see Councillor Dudas.
I have one quick question.
Yes, a quick question. Go ahead.
It's to staff. We held this because we didn't have confidence that the developer, the applicant, was going to fulfill his obligations to another property. And I see that staff are saying that that's another process. I still don't have confidence, so I'm just kind of wondering, like, where do we go from here?
Well, why don't we hold this item, because I see another hand up, and I think this does deserve a bit of discussion and background from staff. So let's hold this item and we'll come back to it afterwards. Thank you, Councillor Dudas. And Councillor Leeper, I saw your hand as well. Item number 2 is another deferral. It's the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 335 and 339 Roosevelt Avenue, 344 Winston, and 379 and 389 Wilmot Avenue in Kitchissippi. There are delegations registered, so we will hold this item. Item number 3 is the Carlington North Veterans Housing Heritage Study. We had quite a lengthy discussion on this at Built Heritage Subcommittee. Was it last week, Ralston, or the week before? I've lost track of our committee dates. Week before. Councillor Brockington's at another event. He just advised us yesterday that he wouldn't be here at the beginning. He did say in that email he strongly supports this item. We don't have any delegations. We don't have any delegations registered on this. Do any committee members wish to hold this for questions or concerns? I will note one thing. There's a revised report. There's an email sent to committee on this yesterday, just updating the report to include the councillor's comments and climate implication section, but there were no material changes to the report. So on this item, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. And thanks again. You know, I know we thank staff and this local councillor and community associations profusely back at Built Heritage Subcommittee, but probably worth doing that again. Thank you to everyone for the collaborative work on this this particular file. Item number 4 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 982 to 986 Francis Street in Rito, Rockliffe. We do have 2 delegations registered, so we'll hold this one and come back to it. Item number 5 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 2046 and 2050 Scott Street and 295, 299, and 301 Ashton Avenue in Kitchissippi. There's a technical amendment that we can bring up on the screen and have introduced by Co-Chair Moffat. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning. So whereas report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0027 recommends approval of a zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate the construction of a 30-story mixed-use high-rise building, and whereas an inconsistency was identified between the report, the location map, and the details of recommended zoning, therefore be it resolved that document 1, location map, be replaced with the attached map, and therefore be it further resolved that document 2, details of recommended zoning, be amended by replacing the text TM XXXX H92 with the text TM XXXX H97. Therefore be further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act.
I see Court Curry's hand up. Court, I'll go to you. Do you have a question or comment? Court's in our right-of-way manager at the city. Maybe Court's hand is up inadvertently. Court, I'll check in one more time. I see your hand raised.
Sorry, Chair, I'm having a technical difficulty. My hand is not raised. Apologies.
Okay, thank you, Court. We have no delegations registered. Councillor Leeper, this is in your ward. Do you have any, do you wish to hold this? Do you have any questions or comments that we can consider now, or?
No, I'll just note that I'll be supporting this. Obviously, several years ago, I was seeking to have a more thoughtful approach to Scott Street that would see some added density over what the secondary plan contemplated, where heights were, clearly inappropriate in light of the arrival of LRT. But a new height standard has been established around this, and I don't have the planning grounds upon which to object to this. I do want to thank the developers who have had a good back and forth for quite a reasonable period of time to make some modifications so that the building is better integrated on the south side. But I'll be supporting this one today.
Okay, thank you. So without any delegations and without any further questions from councillors, we do have the representative from the applicant, Nick Sutherland from FOTEN. Nick, if our committee is prepared to carry this, do you wish to speak on the item?
Mr. Chair, no, that's fine. Happy to proceed as is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's deal with the technical amendment first. Is the technical amendment carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. And then the zoning bylaw amendment as amended and report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, thank you. Item number 6 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 54, 56, and 60 Bayswater Avenue in Kitchissippi. We do have a deferral motion, I believe. Kelly, is that ready to go?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. If we can bring that up on the screen, and I think it's Co-Chair Moffat moving that deferral motion.
I didn't have that. I actually had a deferral motion at some point for the next item, but not for this one. So I'll just read it. If you can just pop up to the top so I can read it from the start. Oh, no, maybe I won't read it from the start. Just go back to the bottom. Therefore, be resolved that Planning Committee approve the following with respect to report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0035. 1, accept the enclosed revised report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0035. And 2, defer the report as revised to the May 12th, 2022 meeting of Planning Committee with notice being provided.
I see a hand up in the room from Kimberly Baldwin. Kimberly, is this a question or an issue with this item? Okay, and that hand is down again. Another technical issue. Yeah, there's some changes being made to this report, and so we thought it'd be prudent to delay this to the next meeting so that the community has time to review and consider that before we make a decision on it. So on the deferral motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Okay, item number 7 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 18 Louisa Street in Somerset Ward. There's another deferral motion on this one. Co-Chair Moffat.
That's the one I had. Whereas in accordance with the Planning Act and City of Ottawa official plan, public notification of zoning bylaw amendments is required for statutory public meetings, and whereas staff have identified that notice with respect to this item was distributed to the wrong residents, it's an issue. Whereas proper notice needs to be provided at least 10 days prior to statutory public meeting, whereas staff recommend that this item be deferred to the May 12th Planning Committee to ensure proper notice is provided, and whereas the applicant is agreeable with the proposed deferral, therefore be it resolved that the Planning Committee defer the item until the May 12th, 2022 Planning Committee and authorize a revised report to be submitted to the committee with notice being provided. I bet you that the people that got the wrong notice, I bet you they were like losing their minds.
Thank you, Scott. On the technical motion, is that carried? On the deferral motion, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. So that'll be deferred to the next meeting. Item number 8 on the agenda is a zoning bylaw amendment for 2275 Mel Bleu Road in Cumberland. We do not have any delegations registered. This is in Councillor Kitz's wards. Do we need to hold this item? Any questions or comments from committee?
I'll make a comment if no one has any questions. But
Go ahead, Councillor.
yeah, so I just want to say I've worked with the applicant on this application to satisfy some of the community's concerns. But I would like to call the community's attention to the fact that this is another application that will be adding cars to the Brian Coburn corridor that has no rapid transit solution at present. I am hopeful that a joint committee will soon be struck to resolve the impasse with the NCC as council recently approved, but I would be remiss not to take every opportunity to highlight that these applications continue to come forward as the impasse remains. And with respect to this application, there will be some phasing with the higher density block, but that's necessary because the situation is becoming increasingly untenable, as you've all heard me speak about many times. So I will leave it there for today. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kitts. So since we have no delegations and no requests to hold, we do have the applicant, representative from the applicant, Lisa De La Rosa from FOTEN. Lisa, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you need to speak on the item?
Good morning, Chair and Council members. Yeah, we're fine if this gets carried. We don't need to speak.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. So for the zoning bylaw amendment for 2275 Mel Bleu Road, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Okay. Item number 9 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 2960 Litrium Road in Gloucester, South Nepean. There is a technical amendment from Co-Chair Moffat. Scott, busy day for you.
And this one's super heavy and impactful. Whereas with respect to report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0039, the comments by ward councillor was not included in the staff report. Therefore, be resolved that with respect to report ACS 2022 PIEPS 0039, the comments by ward councillor section be revised. 2, the councillor is aware of the application related to this report. Therefore, be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act. That's a heavy one. We should probably do yeas and nays.
We can hold it.
Okay. All right. Are there are no delegations registered? Are there any questions or any requests to hold this item? I'm seeing none. Melissa Cote is here from Taggart. Melissa, if the committee is prepared to carry this item, do you wish to speak on it?
Mr. Chair, I do not need to address the committee if the item is carried.
Okay, thank you. So on the technical amendment, is that carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried, thank you. On the report recommendations as amended for 2960 Leitrim Road, are they carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Okay. Item number 10 is a report, heritage permits issued through Delegated Authority 2021. Is that report received?
Received.
Received.
Received, thank you. So that's our going through the agenda. So we will go back to the very beginning. Item number 1 that we held was the zoning bylaw amendment for 129 and 133 Catherine Street from Somerset Ward. There were a couple questions, and Councillor McKenney, the local councillor for the address, has also joined us. Good morning, Catherine. Councillor Dudas, you had your hand up first with a question, so let's go to you first.
Well, I'll just, once again, I repeat my question from earlier is we held this, we didn't have confidence in the applicant. So where do we go from here? Because I'm uncomfortable having said we were going to hold it, we were going to hold their feet to the fire, make sure that they're going to do their due diligence on a property on another section of our downtown core. And now we're just going to trust in a separate process today. So could you outline what that separate process is? Because once again, I'm still uncomfortable with this.
Okay, we do have Steve Willis, General Manager from Planning is here, and Simon Diaco, who's the planner on this file. So Steve, do you want to address that?
Yes, Chair, thanks very much. And certainly members of committee, the department remains concerned about the issue of Somerset House, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but I want to talk about Catherine Street. And the reason why Catherine Street is the item before you, and you'll recall at last committee, Mr. Mark and staff did identify the fact that these are separate files legally under the Planning Act and need to be considered separately. We respect committee's decision because of its frustration with respect to Somerset House, and would not have brought this forward had the issue circumstances not changed. And circumstances have changed in that the chief building official has identified to me concerns that the condition of the Catherine Street location is deteriorating. And so the Catherine Street building, just recall, had a fire in it. The owner sought a zoning change to reconstruct it to add additional units in the building. There are no concerns from staff, and Mr. Diaco can talk to it about the nature of the zoning application. But the chief building official is concerned that the building remains unfinished on Catherine Street, and that's detrimental to that property. And we don't want to see a second property get into a state of further disrepair. So I asked that this item be brought forward again to committee for a chance to the committee to vote for it, because we think it's in the public interest to advance on the Catherine Street file while we deal with Somerset House separately. And again, I can elaborate further on matters with respect to Somerset House, but I wanted to emphasize why Catherine Street, in our opinion, needs to be dealt with now.
That is very helpful. And I don't, I suspect that the ward councillor has additional questions. I think though that, and maybe this is an offline, maybe it's a memo to committee members or something, I think we need to understand what's happening with Somerset House, because that's a huge issue. It's been percolating for, God, I don't even know how long, what, a decade now? This is ridiculous. So I am comfortable with your comments in respect to Catherine. I wouldn't want to see that spot, that location is now putting the safety of the community in jeopardy, or that can't move forward. But I'm not comfortable with the Somerset House condition, and I don't like rewarding bad behavior. So I'm comfortable with your response. I'm not comfortable with the applicant's proposal at these two sites. So if there's a way that you could outline the process on that other property to us, so we could have some comfort in that, that would be appreciated.
So Chair, there are a number of moving factors right now on Somerset House, and staff are looking at mechanisms to bring more information to Build Heritage Subcommittee and Council on that. There are enforcement actions in progress, and don't think it's appropriate to talk about it in the context of Catherine Street, because Catherine Street's before you right now, but certainly we will be prepared to update Council on Somerset House at the appropriate time.
Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Dudas for your questions, and thank you to this committee for the support shown on this file. And by file, I don't just mean the Catherine Street property, of course, but the entire file under this owner and his responsibility and lack of accountability, lack of responsibility that he shows to our neighborhoods. This has been exceptionally frustrating, including including the fact that, again, this owner would allow this property to fall into such disrepair and start to show mold and other factors that could cause damage to the property. It is just further evidence that he is not a responsible neighbor, and Somerset House, I think, is the most egregious example we have of that, probably in the city. I might get some argument from Councillor Leeper and some from Councillor Fleury, because I know they have examples in their wards as well of pretty neglectful heritage properties. But I want to, I think that I just wanted to emphasize. I wanted to thank the committee, and I want to emphasize that that I am working with staff. We are considering all levers we have on Somerset House. And given the turn of events here, given the fact that this did not compel this owner to actually move ahead on Somerset in any meaningful way, I will be working with staff and coming back to you and asking for assistance to actually make meaningful change on Somerset House, so that we can ensure that it stands as a piece of our city's heritage. It is our city's heritage. It's a piece of our city's heritage, and the owner does not have the right to allow that to crumble, and does not have the right to keep the corner of Bank of Somerset in the type of disrepair that it is. So I just wanted to state that up front before the vote on this. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McKinney. Are there any other questions or comments for staff on this? Okay, so on the report recommendations for the zoning bylaw amendment for 129 and 133 Catherine Street and Somerset Ward, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor McKinney, for your comments today and attention to this file and the important building at the corner of Bank and Somerset. Item number 2 was held as well. This is the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 335 and 339 Roosevelt Avenue, 344 Winston Avenue, and 379 and 389 Wilmot Avenue in Kitchissippi. We have a number of delegations registered. What we're going to do is have a short presentation from staff, from Steve Gauthier. He's the planner on this file. Good morning, Steve. And then we'll go to the applicants for a short presentation, and then we will hear from each of the 5 registered delegations. So we'll begin with the presentation from Steve.
So no need to read the address. It's a very long address, so if you could go to the next slide. So this image shows the location of the property, located immediately south from the transit corridor and the multi-use pathway. To the west is Roosevelt Avenue, And to the south is Wilmount Avenue. Next slide, please. So the recommendation for this official plan amendment and rezoning is to permit 12-story high-rise apartments and three-story low-rise apartments. Next slide. So more specifically, Schedule C2 and C, maximum building height that is presently at up to 8 stories. So the zoning bylaw amendment itself is to rezone the entirety of the property to residential 5th density. A height schedule will be applied to reflect the proposed development. And the maximum height would now be at 39 meters, whereas 7 stories is presently permitted with 40% of the footprint that's allowed to go as high as 8 stories. And that's according to a 2014 OMB decision. So this is the site plan. As you can see, there's the 2 12-story high-rise building with the proposed three-story low-rise apartment immediately south. You can also see the different step back that are applied to the 2 towers. Next slide. So here's a rendering from a south perspective. So you do see the three-story low-rise apartment. The 2 apartments to the east are linked. And you can also see in between the 2 high-rises a connection from Winston Avenue to the multi-use pathway. And this is a north perspective. And on this slide, you see a 45-degree angular plane that's being applied to both towers, well, to the entirety of the development from a south perspective. So as you can see towards the west, there's very little encroachment upon the angular plane for the west tower. And for the east tower, the only encroachment that you can see is to the east of the building, where the tower has been slightly recessed at 2 locations. And now the 45 angular plane is applied from a north perspective, showing that there's no encroachment above the plane. So to do a comparison between the 2014 OMB decision and the proposed development, with the 7 and 8 stories permitted under the decision, 60% of the lot could have been covered. And whereas with the proposed development, 48.6% will be covered. So that's 19% under the 60%. So the previous proposal that was appealed to the OMB was proposing to the west a 16-story tower and to the east a 14-story tower. But this proposal was appealed, and an OMB decision resulted for a 7 to 8 stories, where the as of right would permit, I guess, more lot coverage, but less height. So that's it for the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We'll come back to Steve and planning staff later for questions. We're going to move to the applicant presentation now. There's a number of representatives from the applicant here today: Jacob Building from Foten, Barry Hoban from Hoban Architecture, and Dan Tomka, Emily Myers, and Brian Casagrande as well. Dan and Emily are from Uniform, and Brian is from Foten. I believe Jacob is going to lead off with the presentation. Good morning, Jacob.
Good morning, co-chair. Just waiting for my slides. Perfect. Thank you. Good morning, co-chairs, members of the committee. My name is Jacob Bolduc, Senior Planner at FOTEN. I'll do my best not to repeat Mr. Gautier's presentation and keep it brief. So if we could skip ahead to the next slide, please. This is just a slide to note that we don't have a site plan control application in at the moment. It's just official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. I'm going to focus the rest of my presentation on sort of the history of the file. So next slide, please. The project team first approached the community in the summer of 2019 to present some preliminary concepts and get initial feedback. And it was only about a year later in the summer of 2020 that these applications were formally submitted. Following the first public meeting and the technical circulation comments received, Uniform elected to completely revise the project and came back to the city in the summer of 2021 with generally the proposal you see before you today. We had another public meeting and spent the winter making some adjustments due to setbacks from infrastructure under the existing multi-use pathway. Next slide, please. On the left is the original proposal submitted in summer 2020, featuring 2 towers following the podium tower design and having building heights of 18 and 21 stories respectively. This perspective that you see on the slide is from the Kitchissippi, or currently Dominion Station transit station. On the right is the revised design you see before you today, consisting of a stepped massing with varying step backs at upper levels to provide proper built form transition to adjacent residential areas in the public realm along the multi-use pathway and the new proposed mid-block crossing. Next slide, please. The revisions made the buildings a little wider and squatter, but we have still been able to maintain a lot coverage of under 50%, of which the remaining balance of land is predominantly landscaped open space. This includes the new mid-block connection at the northern terminus of Winston Avenue, connecting to the MUP and providing direct access to the transit station via the bridge. Despite lowering the building heights significantly in the revised proposal, this has only reduced the total density by about 10%. Further, Uniform has revised the unit mix to include more 2+ bedrooms, resulting in fewer overall units, but a more family-friendly mix of sizes and dwelling typologies. This includes the new proposed low-rise apartment buildings along Winston and Wilmot, providing ground-oriented housing and on-site transition to abutting residential areas. This provides market-based rental missing middle housing and a much-needed supply and diversity of dwelling types to address a variety of demographic profiles within Westboro. Next slide, please. You've already heard about the previous OMB decision. We've received many comments from the public. This was a decision rendered in 2014 based on an application made in 2011. The decision, if built, could result in a long, wide bar building with a cut through for a pedestrian connection. And whereas the OMB decision allows for a 0-meter setback to the north along the multi-use pathway, Uniform has been working with city staff to provide setbacks along this property line to accommodate infrastructure, despite there being no legal instrument to demand it otherwise. And further, separating the bar building under the OMB decision to result in 2 8-story buildings, similar to this proposal, would result in a density of around 25% less than what is currently proposed, which we believe is a lost opportunity for supportive density at a new LRT station. Next slide, please. With respect to the LRT station, the new Kitchissippi station is generally surrounded by smaller properties containing single detached, semi-detached, and other low-density housing forms. The larger catchment area includes a significant portion of the parkway and the river, resulting in a lower number of potential riders within walking distance. As the largest single property in close proximity to the new LRT station, we believe it's imperative that the development meets transit-oriented policies under provincial and municipal frameworks. Next slide, please. The 2011 application that went to the OMB was submitted under the 2005 PPS. A few months after the 2014 OMB decision, the province released the 2014 PPS, and since then, we've had a new updated version in 2020. This set of applications was submitted under the 2020 PPS, which requires transit supportive development and prioritizes intensification in proximity to transit corridors and stations. As you can see on the slide, there has been a gentle progression from 2005 to 2020, where we're seeing more frequent terms around transit and intensification as the provincial policy directive moved towards transit supportive development. Next slide, please. The official plan has also seen many changes since the 2011 application. While the discussion from 2011 to 2014 was largely centered around alignment and funding, the new Kitchissippi station is set to open in 2-3 years as part of Stage 2 West. Approved within weeks of the 2014 PPS, OPA 150 restructured the official plan around the significant investment in the LRT made by the city, including policies supportive of infill development in the general urban area near rapid transit. Next slide, please. Further, despite changes to the PPS and the OP, the secondary plan is still largely the same as when it was approved in 2009, nearly 13 years ago. The secondary plan places the current Dominion station in the same sector as Westboro Station, identified as Sector 5 on the slide, stating that Westboro Station has the greatest development potential of the two. The new Kitchissippi station is identified as having a more limited potential per the policies. Westboro Station, despite Schedule C on this slide, has seen recent approvals for over 25 stories, with recent proposals seeking up to 40. Given the policy updates over the last decade, including most recently the new official plan, the secondary plan provides little guidance for intensification near transit, given the updates over the last few years. And I suppose I would end my presentation by saying if 25 to 30 stories is considered appropriate for Westboro Station, then I believe 12 stories is surely appropriate and considered limited per the policies of the secondary plan. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over now to Barry Hoban, who will present a more overview of the design.
So Jacob, we are actually over our 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to pause your group there. There may very well be questions for you and Barry later on, and we could come back to slides as needed, but we do have to pause there because we have a number of delegations. So we're going to go to our delegations now. The first delegation is Tony Michel. So each of our delegations will have 5 minutes to present. Is Tony with us?
I believe he's just coming into the room.
Thanks, Kelly.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
Yes, we can. Welcome, Tony. Good morning. So the floor is yours.
Very much.
5 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Tony Michel. I'm a resident of Westboro Beach, and I'm representing the Community Association. A decade ago, I went to the OMB and blocked a high rise on this site. And I would like to encourage committee to, again, on behalf of the WBCA, can we go to the next slide, to reject this OPA and defend the integrity of its new official plan. I'm not going to read everything on every slide. You have these in your package. Next slide, please. So what happened? Briefly, a 3-year OMB process ended up in the city losing. And recalling that the OMB and its successor, the OLT, are semi-judicial bodies, the city is legally obliged to obey provincial regulatory tribunals. I'll come back to that later. Although this site, as the OMB said, has been studied for years, and this neighborhood, quote, has been arguably among the most intensively studied in Ontario, you won't find that in the report. Its history section ignores everything above the line and begins in 2020. So I'll give you a quick review. Next slide, please. Why did the city lose at the OMB? The Westboro secondary plan articulates a policy principle to preserve the neighborhood as a low-rise neighborhood. It actually, blocks high rises. It's very unusual. Each secondary plan is unique. It does this through some maximum height restrictions. So this OPA is not a technical interpretation. It's a sharp policy shift. So high burden of proof. Next slide. What is new? Not really much since 2014. We have the same Planning Act. And if anything, the PPS strengthens the power of official plans to be the most important vehicle to implement it. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, the new official plan is only 5 months old. I believe it's premature to be amending it with site-specific OPAs already. As everybody knows, Volume 1 is the guiding principles, and the key thing here, Volume 2 applies them to the specific character of every neighborhood. So what does our plan say? Next slide, secondary plan for Westboro says that we support intensification, but we need a framework. And that framework requires a unifying vision with principles such as preserving the scale and the character of the neighborhood. I'm putting this here, it's not in your staff report. Next slide. This is the site in question. I want to give you a Google Map visualization. You're floating above the Kitchissippi LRT station. We'll go on to the next slide, please. Again, I'm not going to read all of this, but it basically specifically says Westboro can have high rises, but there's very limited potential at Kitchissippi. And then the plan goes on in the secondary plan to outline maximum heights. Sorry, next one, please. That was not in your staff report, and this slide is not in your staff report either. It's again, limiting, forbidding high rises. Next slide. So again, this is another view more from our community's point of view, looking across the street. I look straight up my street at this site. In the past, the applicant has argued this sits on an edge of the community. That's only if you completely ignore our community. Next, please. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's the OMB's interpretation of our secondary plan. It says projects must conform to a height maximum. These provisions were declared to have a unifying vision which focuses on building scale based on the guiding principles that one should preserve the scale of existing neighborhoods. The intent to limit height and regulate the skyline was unambiguous. The secondary plan added that projects should conform to the built form recommended in the community design plan. If the city were now to embark on a different direction, the above is what it would be digressing from. This is the 2014 report. Clearly saying this is not a technical decision. Next slide. Okay, I want to show you this because it's not in the report. It's an unusual thing to see. I know our secondary plan has a height maximum for every property. Can you go to the next slide, which zooms in a bit?
Tony,
There's
that's your time. If you can wrap up quickly, please.
Okay, then go to the very last slide, please. We call on the planning committee to reject this OPA, which is a sharp policy turn away from the unifying vision in our secondary plan. You'll also find in my deck, which you can review later, that there's a basic principle that the specific rule always overrides the general rule. The approach of the applicant, and I'm sad to say of planning staff, has been to pull together a hodgepodge of general principles from the PPS and volume 1 as though there was no secondary plan. It's beyond jurisdictional function of a municipal planning staff to just think they can do better than what the OMB has done. So the community is prepared to take this to the Ontario Land Tribunal once again, and the city has the same arguments from the staff report. I don't expect a different result, especially since we have an OMB report in our back pocket.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tony, thank you very much for the presentation. I think everyone is aware that I'll be supporting you in rejecting this application today. One of the things that was in the OMB's decision from 2014, at section 59, they said that the board cannot agree with planning staff's approach to the governing document or the role of maps. If the purpose of planning is for municipalities and stakeholders to know what is expected of them, then it is the antithesis of that purpose to suppose that people can't read maps, I'm paraphrasing now, that the official documents do not mean what they say, or that predictability is impossible without resorting to the subjective interpretation of a handful of insiders. Do you believe that the way in which staff have justified their recommendation to approve this application represents good planning?
Having had this decade of experience diving into these documents, seeing how the OMB rules on it, I'm very sad to say that nothing seems to have been learned. I don't think it is good planning. And I could even talk about basic democratic governance 101. It's really a shame that policy-driven planning, which is what we were told by the member, that planning has to be driven by policy, is evident when the city's planning department makes beautiful plans. The policy section of your planning department makes great plans. But then the other side of your planning department that reviews applications, they don't write plans, they write OPAs that undermine the plans. And, you know, good planning is when you ask private interests to conform to the public good, not when you amend the plan to fit the building. It should be the other way around. It's incomprehensible why I should be asking the city a second time to defend its own plans. It's public plans, which, as you say, it give, you know, the average citizen a sense of where is planning going. I mean, if you're going to put it in the plan and then you're going to ignore it, or a sort of small group of experts can just decide, well, it doesn't really mean what it says. That's not planning.
What do you make of the argument that, oh, there's LRT here now? That's different than 2014.
Well, in terms of the infrastructure, there'll be a, you know, station, but it's a very, you know, everything is unique, right? This is the LRT stop that has the least number of transfers in the entire city, 0. Okay, there's no connecting buses, there's no intersecting lines, there's no park and ride. It's pedestrian only. This is like a whistle stop thing. It, you know, it's almost like a historical accident that we even have a stop here, because Westboro is a hub, and it will then go on to Lincoln Fields. Like those places, that's where you need perhaps greater height. The point is, though, it's not for you or me to decide this. It's already been decided and applied in the specific rule, which is the secondary plan. And that's why they made those scales. They even said that there's limited capacity at Kitchissippi Station. And this is not an old secondary plan. You look at the plan, all of the number 1 and 3 lines are in there. The name's been changed. Like, it's the planning department approved Schedule C as it is just 5 months ago.
Tony, thanks for the presentation today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Curry has a question.
Thank you very much for this. I've spent a lot of time, as Councillor Leeper will tell you, I met with him, we talked about this at length, I've read everything, had the presentations. I guess I want to ask you, so your comment about the LRT, I always find at these meetings, people talk about now, but once the buildings are built, I think the LRT and the connecting buses and things will change. I mean, that's the thing, these buildings stand for 100 years, right? And times change, and that maybe is the theme of this motion. But I just want to make that comment, but I want to ask you, you know, the OLT in Canada, the OLT just ruled against where we didn't even have a stormwater management plan, and they didn't care about that. So I hear that you might want to take this to the OLT, but I would tell you that the OLT right now is maybe not your friend. My main question though is, if this is approved and it goes from 8 to 12, what is the harm to this community? You know, you're on the edge of the community, or the community you say don't want to be disregarded. You are the closest community. What is the harm to the community if this is higher?
Well, I mean, I could talk about the immediate harms. Those are outlined in the OMB report too, about oversight, about completely distorting and changing the scale of the neighborhood. Like literally, everybody will be looking up at this behemoth, you know, at the end of my street. I live on Atlantis. But the real danger, is that the slippery slope. It's sort of like, if they're allowed to do this, well, then pretty soon we're going to have high rises right up against the NCC land, you know, on my side and on the other side. Like, if the plans mean what they say, it's planning staff's job to ask the developer to conform to the plans. But if every developer who comes along can just sort of negotiate a little bit, and it becomes evident that the plans don't really mean anything, you just get out a black Sharpie, ask for a specific OPA that fits the building. It's not a policy change, it's just serving the private interest. So I don't know where the next one will be. Like either the plan has power or it's toothless. I don't know. And I have a slightly different view of the Land Tribunal because the OMB is its legal predecessor. And there is a certain hesitancy to override and negate sort of the previous rulings. They have to have a continuity there. And the same arguments still apply because the planning documents haven't changed.
Okay, I hear you, what you're saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Moffat, your hand was up, or Co-Chair Moffat, it's not anymore. Okay, thank you very much, Tony, for your presentation. We're going to move on to our second speaker, Heather Mitchell, Chair of the Westboro Community Association. And there's also a written submission on file from Heather. Good morning, Heather.
Good morning. Sorry, councillors, I'm just going to adjust my lighting so you don't get a huge weird, oh, that's not much good. Oh, that's better. Thank you very much for hearing me today. I'm the chair of the Westboro Community Association. I'm not going to reiterate most of the points that have been made previous. And besides, Tony is the expert in the policy issues. So I just want to pick up on a few points. One that Jeff pointed out. LRT planning, secondary plan 2009, OMB 2014. What has changed in terms of the transit planning? Nothing. Kitchissippi, the future Kitchissippi station has been a bus station, as has Westboro, for all these years. There's been density required. The trench has been there for all these years. The fact that it's going to be LRT is, of course, very important. But we knew that in 2014, and the OMB made their decision on 8 stories based on the fact that the LRT was going to be there. So there's no new information here at all. So I don't see any reason why we should be going for an OP change based on anything to do with transit. Another point that was raised by the developer was about the taller, slimmer design, if you want to call it, will have less density because he's losing a little bit of density. You would lose a bit of density if you made a shorter building. There's no context has been presented. There are many buildings going up around this area. They're going along Richmond Road. They're going along in smaller infills. There are some low-rise apartment buildings going on right in that area and all throughout Westboro. There is a significant amount of intensification happening in all of Kitchissippi Ward, and especially in Westboro, if I can say, and also some of the other community association areas. To have the same intensity, the same density on in this site that we would expect to see on Scott Street is unrealistic and unnecessary. I don't see that it's any sort of discussion that you're not maximizing the density. I don't see that it's required here at all. Some density, yes, of course. As the OMB decision was, 8 stories, great, let's bring it on. So the bottom line is the site is covered by the secondary plan that prohibits the 12 stories, and that's because it's a low-rise neighborhood. We'd like to at least keep some of the character of the neighborhood. We want to welcome new neighbors to the neighborhood with the wonderful 8-story design that I know this developer can produce. This developer is well known in Ottawa. They're excellent. They do great design work. I know they can do a beautiful 8-story design for us and satisfy all the requirements. To the OP itself, here we've got a brand new baby OP, and already people are wanting to make changes to it. And as a community, we just don't understand that. We thought that with these policy directions, we were going to have some surety. And here we are right at the beginning of this new, fresh, shiny plan we have, and already people want to make changes to it. The secondary plan should be preferred over any general overarching policy discussions, because this is our area and the plan has meaning and is significant to our area, and our residents would expect it to be followed. Our ward, and as I've touched on this, have taken on the bulk of the intensification in the city, the core, and Kitchissippi. We just would ask for you to think carefully about adding another development, especially given the policy framework around this, and especially since this site has been contentious before, to give it some serious thought as to whether we need this kind of 12-story development. We would really prefer that this committee refuse the 12-story design and ask the developer to go back and conform to what the OMB gave us before. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. Co-Chair Moffat has a question for you.
Thanks. Sorry, it's not a question, just a clarification. That's the second time I've heard the comment that this is an official plan amendment for the new official plan of the City of Ottawa. This is an official plan amendment based on the previous official plan. The new official plan is not yet in effect because we're still waiting on that from the province. So all the applications that we're dealing with now and for the next little while will still be based under when they were applied for, which is under the previous official plan.
Thank you. I was looking at my notes and I realized as I was saying that was to your point. Thank you very much. However, I hope the councillors will not disregard the rest of my presentation as a result of that little mistake.
No, understood. Understood. I just wanted to know that it wasn't to minimize anything else you're saying. Thank you.
When it comes to those issues, listen to my previous colleague.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you very much.
Our third speaker is Dean Tester. Good morning, Dean.
Good morning. Thank you, co-chairs and councillors, for having me again here today. It's always nice to speak with you. So the last couple of presentations, I think, focused pretty heavily on planning and some of the technical aspects of this proposal. I'd like to talk about people. The people who will be most affected by this building are going to be the people who eventually call it home. They're very rarely represented at meetings like this. There will be hundreds, if not thousands of people who live in a building like this over the course of its lifetime. This project, my understanding is it's been initially proposed, the first version in 2011. So we're talking already 10 years of people who have not been able to get a home in this neighborhood, 10 years of costs increasing for construction, 10 years of rental prices skyrocketing in the city. And, you know, that is a huge loss to this neighborhood, to the city, to our community. You know, I heard some comments about not needing density here, and we need density in every corner of this city. There is a huge housing shortage in Ottawa. We are 72,000 units behind the G7 average. Our house prices are out of control. Our rent prices are skyrocketing. We need projects like this. And it really frustrates me when I hear people talking about the harm to the community. Councillor Curry had a great question about what is the harm to the community if this project is 12 stories instead of 8 stories. And the response was, the greatest harm to this community is that people will be uncomfortable looking up at a tall building. And I'm sorry, but that is not a good enough justification to deny housing to thousands of people. And that's what's happening when we look at these super technical things instead of the stories and the people who are behind these projects. When we think of these projects in terms of the city versus you know, the rich, evil developers, and we ignore the fact that there are going to be hundreds of families who call places like this home, who, you know, maybe they're just getting out of school and starting a career, maybe they're a student, maybe it's someone like me who's having trouble affording their first home in this market and is looking for a 2 or 3 bedroom rental so that I can grow my family. Like those are the stories that are never heard at these meetings and that are not reflected in these comments. So, you know, I get really frustrated when I hear those comments, and I would just urge council to consider, you know, as a broader principle, you know, we're talking about the public good here. What public good is achieved by denying hundreds of people homes for 10 years in a place like this, in a community like this, right next to transit? And you know, the last thought that I want to leave you with, and this is for the community associations and the councillor. The federal government and provincial governments are increasingly talking about what they're going to do to communities like Ottawa when they don't build density near transit. If this project ends up getting delayed, if they're successful at appealing it at the land tribunal, you're going to see another proposal in 5 years from now, and it's going to be 25 stories, right? And the province is going to say, you have to build it. That is the future of building around transit. And if we can't get modest projects like this approved, the province is going to come in and force our hands. So I would really just say, I urge you all to approve this project. Based on my understanding, it looks like a great community. They've made tons of concessions already. I think they tried really hard to work with the community associations. And I really hope to see this approved, because this is the type of neighborhood I'd love to live in and see more of in our city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. And Dean, you make obviously a number of really important, legitimate points, and you know, every community across Ottawa is going to have to accept greater density. Intensification is the only way we're going to build a sustainable city. You mentioned your frustration, though. Do you have any frustration around the fact that for 10 years there has been a path for this builder to get a shovel in the ground, and they have not done so? We would not be here today if this was proposed as 2 8-story buildings, which is what the provincial tribunal responsible for refereeing disputes around zoning said they could build back in 2014.
Yeah, that's a great question, Councillor. And sure, I think that would have been the easy way out, and the developer, I'm sure if you chatted with them, they'd say, yes, we could have walked in and built this 8 stories. But that has an impact too, right? Because what you're talking about, and we see this whenever heights get knocked down, this proposal has already lost, I think, 100 units from its original design. You would be losing things like 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments. So you're losing some of the family-friendly stuff there. You'd probably be losing the through fare between the buildings, the pedestrian area, which was a major concession it looked like the developer made to try and keep the community on board with this project. So yes, they could have built this for, you know, 150 people or 200 people instead of 300 people a few years ago, but that's still the loss of hundreds of families in this community, right?
I'm not sure if we're talking about hundreds, right? The unit count difference is relatively negligible, and it's not like this neighborhood hasn't got thousands of units approved. I don't know if you were here, we just approved without debate a 30-story building 200 meters away that will have a significant number of 2 bedrooms. There's low-rise units that face onto the street that are ground oriented. You know, the difference in terms of the number of people who can be accommodated in Kitchissippi ward in this instance is negligible. They could have built this 6 years ago with the permissions that were extended by it wasn't a council decision. It was a provincial tribunal decision. And in the meantime, we continue to see thousands of units, which makes a significant dent in the housing inventory, continue to be approved across the ward. So I just raise it as a perspective to play devil's advocate here. I do appreciate that you came out today.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and I certainly appreciate your support for other density projects in your ward. And I know you always try and take a very balanced take on these issues, and I appreciate your perspective. I would just reiterate that, there's a huge loss to people when we can't get this stuff built. And I understand what you're saying. It's not 100 people today, but over 100 years, a difference of 50 units is hundreds of people or thousands of people, right? So that's the perspective I was trying to share. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Dean. I'm seeing no more questions from councillors, so we'll move on to our next speaker. Gay Stinson is up next. Do we have Gay with us?
Hello.
Today? Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning.
All right, good morning. Just give me a second here. I think I should have video.
We can hear you, but we can't see you on screen yet. There you are.
About that. All right, good morning. Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to address this committee yet again, I would say. My name is Gay Stinson and I live at 350A Whitby Avenue. Whitby is where I live, is about 2 blocks from this proposed development. It's not as if it's right in my backyard. I would see it if it sticks way up high in the sky, but otherwise my concern is as a resident of this neighborhood. I was one of the 3 appellants in that case that went to the OMB. It cost the residents 3 years of fundraising, thousands of dollars, a great deal of anxiety, going to the OMB at 3 different occasions, finally to have a decision that was in our favor. And I have to say it is with great dismay. In fact, a number of residents are just totally appalled that here we are again, the same developer coming back with a modified and improved proposal, but one that still exceeds what's allowed under the OMB decision. So like Tony Michel, you have, and also the developer and so on, you've already heard the story about the various tools that the city has for governing the sort of development it wishes to have. Way back from 2009, the overlying objectives and principles, objective 1, intensification, the first principle, number 1, preserve the scale and character of established residential communities, etc. That notion has been consistent throughout. So now we have a revised secondary plan. The official plan is going to be amended, but that principle has been repeated over and over and over again. So it's part of, in designing Ottawa, section 2.5.1 to ensure that new development respects the character of existing areas. I mean, it's throughout policy statements, and it's also entrenched in the official plan, secondary plan that is currently in force. The Dene report, Dene decision from the OMB says, the board disposes of this matter as follows. The draft official plan amendment for the city of Ottawa proposed by the developer, file blah, blah, is modified and set out below. Instead of the draft's phrase 10 stories or more, the official plan amendment shall use the phrase up to 8 stories. So that's the decision that is the current decision and is in force. We are appalled that once again, a developer is going ahead to ask council to say, no, never mind. We don't mean those principles. We don't mean those schedules as passed. We don't need to adhere to an OMB. Oh, that was a few years ago. Now is now after all. So let's just not pay any attention to it. I think we need to pay attention to those things. Those are the tools the city has. Those are the tools that residents have. Someone asked the question, well, what's the harm to the community? Well, the harm to the community is to sacrifice the character of our neighborhood, the characteristics of our neighborhood. It's typified as a low-rise residential area. We have a lot of intensification, a lot of doubles coming where there was a single family home, but they are 2 stories, sometimes 3 stories. There are 2 low-rise apartment buildings at 3 stories plus basement. Our community is predominantly and massively a low-rise residential community. Our community is not really part of the community across the arterial roads and the Scott Street corridor where the Westboro station is going to be. All along Scott Street, it's a main arterial road. All of those 20-something and 30-something story buildings are over there. It's not part of this community. This neighborhood is an established low-rise community neighborhood, and we wish to retain that character. And having 2 great big blocks that rise up into the horizon and override sort of the whole feeling of open sky and the kind of residential walkable neighborhood that we have substantially changes the characteristics of our neighborhood, which is what we love about the neighborhood we all live in. I've lived here for 12 years. I've represented residents before on this, and this is the overwhelming opinion. You've heard discussions about, even in the applicant's proposal, about how there were meetings. A lot of people attended. They were opposed. You've seen Councillor Leeper's report saying the residents are opposed. Well, I am one speaking for residents, as I did before, to say, yes, we are opposed. It substantially changes the characteristic of our neighborhood. I'd also like to say one.
That's your
Can I say
time.
one
I'm
other
gonna
thing?
hold you there,
Okay,
Gay.
that's it. All right.
Councillor Brockington does have a question for you, though. Councillor Brockington?
Thanks, Chair. I do. Good morning, everyone. I, Ms. Stinson, represent neighborhoods similar to yours. They say that there needs to be efforts to defend the characteristics of an existing mature neighborhood. I hear that loud and clear. And in the same breath, though, they say, but Riley, if you can preserve the heart or the integrity of a neighborhood, we will support much greater diversity and height on the periphery of a community. So I want to ask you directly, the proposed development, in my opinion, is on the periphery of the community. It abuts the transitway, and we do want to see density near transitway stations. So I'm not understanding how the proposed location takes away from the character of the neighborhood in particular. The heart of the neighborhood, the integrity will be maintained. Explain to me how the particular location of this development takes away from what you're bringing to our attention today, please.
Well, I think perhaps the main point is what you consider our neighborhood. What we consider our neighborhood goes on both the north and the south side of that, that transitway. It's Westboro Beach and Westboro Community, but we are together. That walkway that's so important, that's going to be maintained from Roosevelt straight through to the other side. People use that, I mean, families use it every single day. The kids go to school that way, coming and going from the north side down to the south side. People come and go shopping. I mean, it's simply our 2 sections, shall you say, the north side and the south side, form one community, and we are all residential on both sides of that. The edge community you described might be over on Dominion, I think it is, where there's a high-rise apartment over there, and then it falls away into sort of a brushy area and then goes off further to the Health Institute. Or on the eastern side, Churchill is a main arterial road. You might consider that to be the edge of the community. However, where this building is, which is in the middle, not on an arterial road, there's no main street there. There's no commercial development there. It's not the edge of the community. It's in the middle of the community. And it's in the middle of the community where everybody is walking back and forth, is walking their dogs, is cycling around. I'm not talking about cyclists going through the community somewhere else, but cyclists just around this neighborhood, going down to the beach, coming back to their homes. Our neighborhood is on both sides.
Thank you for that. Appreciate your delegation.
I wanted to ask, Gay, in the FO10 presentation, there was one slide that had an 8-story building taking up the maximum amount of lot space that the OLT or the OMB, I'm mixing up my acronyms, that the previous decision would have allowed for. And it would have been would be, if that was what they went with, a very big blocky building. Would that be better than what is being proposed now? Because to me, it seems like you wouldn't have some of the transitions, you'd have less open space on the site, you wouldn't have the same missing middle kind of transition that's being proposed now. So would a full lot coverage, maximum 8-story throughout, would that be better?
Well, I don't think that's even an option. I think the designer simply put that forward to scare the community the first time around, to say, look, you can have a Soviet block institutional prison-like building, or you can have our lovely tall pinnacles rising to the sky. I think it's a false dichotomy. There is no reason that the developer could not have 2 towers of 8 stories, expand the footprint. They, in their own presentation, they said their footprint is 48% rather than 60% that they're allowed. If they took the 60%, that still leaves 40% of open space, the pass-through area for pedestrians and so on and so forth. There's no reason they can't do that. In fact, in a consultation that I believe was November of 2021, somebody asked the developer, well, let me put it another way. Is there any constraint, or is there an impediment, I think it was. Was there any impediment to your designing a space that would have a maximum of 8 stories? And the answer was no, except for financial differences. Well, yes. So if it's only for financial reasons, they want high rise and great views and blah, 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 then is that the purpose of the City Planning Council, to let that go ahead because there are going to be those high rise penthouse, et cetera, et cetera? My position is no. I think your role here is to use the tools you have to come with the best judgment for the community. So there's no impediment to having 2 8-story towers, not a huge industrial looking block, and have the stage down and the 3-story as that comes close to Winona, or rather to Wilbrod and I can't remember Wilmot, that's it. Yeah, I just think the old 8-story block thing, no one ever would have actually designed that. So design 2 8-story buildings, broaden the footprint just somewhat. You said you've got 19%, so use it. It still leaves lots of open space.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions from committee members, so thank you, Gay, for your presentation today.
Thank you all for hearing me.
Next speakers are Liam and Hillary Casey. Are they here with us today?
Yes, they are on the call.
Hello, I should be on video, but.
Good morning. Yeah, we can hear you.
Who needs to, oh, sorry.
Yep. And we can
Okay.
see you.
Okay, so mine's Liam Casey. I'm part of the community on the north side. So I do want to just emphasize the piece, to respond to the previous question quickly, that I will be affected directly. I've suffered somewhat from seasonal affective disorder, and I will probably lose 3 hours of the first morning sun in the winter. So other than that, I do not want to go over my first chart. So could you jump quickly to chart 5, please? And here what I want to make the point is, again, it's already been discussed, the case before the OMB was not about intensification, but it was about shape. And the OMB still ruled that for the community, that it was a mid-rise area. And then now, please, if you could skip to the next slide. And again, this is just an aside. people have already spoken about what the official policies are. And the height, and the rationale for the height has been played around transit, has been played before. The original plan and the community development plan, second development plan, deviated from low-rise R3 next to the transit way because it was a transit way. The OMB ruling in 2014 increased the height from the previous ones to 7 stories, partially 8, because of the transitway was there. So we get a new argument in the planning staff's document, which argues basically that we have to treat a multi-use pathway as an arterial road to get more height. And I think if council forwards it, I mean, if the committee forwards this to council as a rationale, they should remove that item. Next slide, please. It's already made the point that as a body, the OLT will follow the precedent of the OMB, except if there's new material. So there's nothing really changed in the neighbourhood. It's still 2-story single dwellings. There's still 30 houses that things like garbage trucks and so on will have to traverse probably at 5:30 in the morning to get to service the new buildings. If I can just draw your attention to the Tiago Building. This is the view from the south or southeast. You might think that it's, I just point out that the streetscape for 7 stories is completely different from what in fact the planner, the document is, which is more than 12 stories for a significant portion of it. There's lots of open sky here. The building is long, or the footprint of the skyline is quite substantially at more than 12 stories for the proposal. So while you may not think that your opinion on what this block looks like, you may not approve of it, but I can certainly tell you from the north side, it doesn't cast shadow over the houses of Westboro Beach. Okay, finally, next slide, please. This is, I think, a point that hasn't been emphasized. There was talk before of 2- and 3-story accommodation. The city is looking for a balance of housing types. The Tiago Building that I just showed you is a mixture of 2 and 3 bedrooms. The proposed development has at most 2 bedrooms plus a den. There's no 3-bedroom units in the plans that have been provided. But more importantly is the city policy is a mixture of housing that contributes to the achievement of balance of housing types and a full range of housing for various demographic profiles. And it doesn't make any case as to why a mid-rise building doesn't meet that policy, very important policy. There is the missing middle.
Liam, that's your time, so I'll ask you to just, we'll have to hold you there. I'm looking to our committee. Are there any questions from our committee members for Liam? I'm seeing none. So thank you very much for your presentation today, Liam, and to all the delegations who made a presentation this morning. We're going to go back to the applicant. We'll just give our clerk's office team a chance to bring them back into the meeting room here. So this is the opportunity for committee members or councillors to ask a question for the applicant. We have, again, representatives from FOTEN, from Uniform, and Barry Hoban from Hoban Architecture here. I think they're still coming in the room here, so.
Yes, they are.
Okay. We'll just wait a moment. Okay, Councillor Moffat, Co-Chair Moffat, you were the first with your hand up, so over to you.
Thanks. First, I have to say I was wrong about something. Tim Mark, in his lovely way of doing so, told me I was wrong. So it's an amendment to the new plan applied under the old plan, but because of the transition, it's allowed to amend the new plan. So I was wrong. And I wanted to make sure I said that I was wrong because I didn't want that to stand. So I just have a question. Barry didn't get a chance to present, but I was here when this came forward years ago. I was one of only 2 people here, shockingly, that were here when this file originally came to us back in my first term. I voted in favor of the original plan. So, and similar to other files that I've had where you have a density target and a height limit, I've voted in favor of taller, more slender designs, looking at design perspective than maybe the overall height that might be in a secondary plan. 900 Albert rings a bell. A similar one on Preston, I remember voting against a reduction in height from 35 stories to 30 stories because one unit count was compromised, as well as design. The building at 30 stories was a much lesser design than the building at 35 stories. Ironically, we approved a 50-story tower right next to it a few years later, but nonetheless. So, question on that. I don't think that what was presented is misleading when you talk about the 8-story impact. Because we do have density targets, and we should have density targets when it comes to near LRT. This, as mentioned by the first speaker, this is an area that has no transfers. So your ridership is going to come from the area around the station. So we should be looking at trying to maximize that. Nonetheless, you can find the same density in 8 stories as 12 stories. So that's not necessarily a density conversation. But the design is, and how the building interacts. And you want people to live in this building, want people to want to live in this building. So the amenity space and these things matter. So I'd like to get just a bit more detail on what it would mean, the same density, 8 stories versus 12 stories. And I figure Barry might be the best to respond to that.
If we pull up our slides a little bit, I could actually speak, because there's been a fair amount of discussion around form as opposed to just height. People just seem fixated on a number as opposed to what the mass actually does, and what's required in order to modify mass. And so when people talk, for instance, if I can pull up the screen here, if we flip through to if you go a little bit further, yeah, one more. Right. Sure, we can start here. Yeah, a certain density is developed as a result of the top diagram. And simplistically, someone's saying, oh, well, what you should do is just simply build 2 smaller footprint buildings and just make them 8 stories. Well, it's a little bit underwhelming. And to tell you the truth, I think if you flip to the next slide, you start to look at how we play with mass. And if I keep going to the next one, I think it's the more telling one. Because it's not just a matter of saying you've got a certain height. If you flip to one more slide, you'll actually see that the area that's, and one more, the area that's 12 stories is a very small area at the top. What actually defines and what it feels like is starts from a building that is at the west end, which is 7 stories in height. And, it really is about how you manipulate mass, both in plane, in the floor plane, because it's a staggered building, as well as in height. A lot of discussion around that part of the argument. And in the end, honestly, if height is not where we're going, what we're actually doing in 12 stories is pretty unusual for what you're seeing around transit stations. We're actually creating a form which is more friendly to the mid and low rise than the high rises. And if you flip ahead a couple of slides, we never even talked at all really about the missing middle, because one of the pieces that, so this is showing the stepping of the building in plan and in height, starting at 7 stories. And you can see the very top part is the 12-story building. So everybody focuses on 12-story buildings. But in actual fact, the way the building is broken down, it's actually modifying the impact of the building. So if you look to the south side, we didn't talk at all about the notion that, and everyone wants to refer back to the 2014 OMB decision and stamp their feet as if, so why isn't it you just doing this? In actual fact, the next slide actually shows we've increased the number, we increased the land holdings so that in fact, in addition to the 2 buildings, we added what are called missing middle units, which are low-rise wood frame, which allow us to accommodate larger units that are family-oriented, ground-oriented. I mean, those are significant changes to the overall piece. So if you keep going back and saying it's got to be the same as, well, things have changed substantially in terms of the land holdings. And so when we talk about 40% or 50% open space, it's while we're actually providing the low-rise components, which are about transition. So I maybe have gone off script there a bit, but I'll stop there and I can respond to other questions. Oh, there was one other comment, the last speaker, I think it's Liam Casey, I think his name was, about sun shadowing, and there are no issues in terms of sun shadow. We've done the sun shadows for all parts of the year. You know, if you want to use December 21st as the shadow thing, the 9-story, the Tiago Building besides probably casts as much a shadow as anything else does on the properties that are to the north. But in most cases, during the rest of the year, there really are minimal impacts.
I appreciate that. I mean, for me, it's probably not a surprise to residents in the area that I have generally favored a taller, more slender design than a lower, boxier design from just I mean, these aren't buildings that are for just today. These are buildings that are for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So their impact, how they respond. And again, like when it comes to the Preston one, 30 or 35 on the ground, it doesn't matter. You look up at 30, 35 stories, makes no difference. The design of the building on the ground as it interfaces with the community and with the people that are going to live there and how they can use the space. You talk about footprint, 60% max footprint, where you're coming in at under 50%. Obviously, an assumption would be that at 8 stories, you're going to maximize the footprint of the building and reduce the amenity space, reduce the public realm space. I think these things all matter. But thanks for taking that extra time to walk through that part. Appreciate that, Barry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockington.
I'll be brief because I no longer have a question. Councillor Moffat touched upon what I wanted to give the proponent an opportunity to do, and that was to talk about, there were some options here, how to, in an architectural format, show us how the number of units could be built. There are different ways, and I think this is actually a way to blend in with the community. When you design the way it's designed, I think despite the reference to other very tall towers in the immediate community, which is true, that if there is a concern about how to blend this within an existing community, I think the design you have now is more respectful. I've had a height challenge with this proposal since day one, in the fact that it's too short. It's not enough. It's beside transit. We should be building big beside transit. That's where we're going. And in 40 or 50 years, this building might be an outlier because it's so short beside a major transit system, because there's not enough. People in the future will say, why didn't they build bigger when they just put $5 billion into their LRT system? And they want to bring as many people as close to the LRT as possible. We need to be building more, but we have to respond to the proposal before us. And I do believe that it is good and something that I'll be supporting. So I have no further questions because we've just had an outline of exactly what I was concerned about. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. You know, I've had my opportunity to ask lots of questions of the developer for quite some time. One of the concerns that I have with the justification that's in the staff report with respect to approving a high rise here as opposed to mid rise is that it is on what staff have characterized as two major pieces of transportation infrastructure. So it's next to the LRT station and it's next to cycling facilities, and those cycling facilities tie into what is becoming increasingly, you know, one of our most robust pieces of cycling infrastructure going east-west. The cycling, the zoning would allow for a minimum 1-to-1 cycling parking. You're proposing 254 vehicle parking spots, which is gobsmackingly high for a building that justifies its shift from mid to high rise in terms of being next to non-vehicular arterial infrastructure. How are you going to handle having 2, 3, 4 bikes in each one of these units?
I assume that's a question for me, Councillor, is it?
Barry, you're probably the best to answer, and I know it's a conversation.
Well, I mean, it's an out there question. I guess the first of all, in the design of these buildings, storage spaces, personal storage spaces are actually used for upscale bikes. They're not just put bikes into what we call a regular bike storage area. But, you know, we're in the process of renting up a building, and, you know, you're talking about the actual potential of a parking space below grade in many of our buildings. So you probably know in the past, we include at the head of each car a secure bike rack. That's part of that, as well as a group bike situation. But I would suspect that if you're a serious biker, and I've got a couple of them in my office, they're not leaving their bike in a bike room. They're actually putting them in personal storage, and we'll have those as part of the project. And there's no question that's an emerging trend. Even if you have a car, you know, the guys that I know are cyclists have a car and they got 3 bikes. Well, you're right. You know, the storage facility that comes with a rental will have to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm looking for the commitments ahead of time before I accept the transportation infrastructure argument with respect to the shift in this building height. I don't think that the commitment to ensuring that people who have, you know, 4 bikes, a winter and a summer bike, are actually being thought through at this point. So I know you continue to have work to do on the site plan, and I'll certainly be encouraging you to look at some of that underground or some of that car parking as secure bike storage, because I just don't believe that the commitment is there today to actually take full advantage of that infrastructure that we have. I guess one of the other things that I would be looking for you to do, and Dan, maybe this is a question for you. If this building gets approved, will you buy your tenants or purchasers bus passes?
Yeah, I'll take that. We are definitely considering, well, first off, I want to say, we're encouraging people to take public transportation without a doubt. And we see those car parking spots, it's really storage units. And through bikes and through the LRT, we will encourage members, residents to take transit. We will offer a parking pass up front, and that was established in the transportation report that we put forth. So yes,
Good. It's encouraging people is different than incenting people by actually buying them that bus pass and getting them onto the LRT. So that's important to me. The units, when I take a look, I can't imagine that these are going to be even market affordable. These are going to be in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city, steps from Westboro Beach, steps to an LRT station, steps to the shopping on Scott Street and Richmond Road. This is obviously going to be an extremely attractive neighborhood. You're going to be able to get some very significant rents or purchase prices depending what you do with this finally. What kind of commitments are you making to affordability so that the we don't continue to exacerbate that gentrification of Westboro, and so that it continues to be a neighborhood that people like Dean will be able to afford?
Well, I'll jump in and lead off. Really, we're going to have a range of units meeting a number of different potential residents. So we see we can really hit a number of different target markets. In terms of the family-oriented design, those 3-story buildings at the front, we would have larger units to attract families. But this overall is a market-based project at this time. We are open to listening and quantifying some other, through CMHC or one of those other avenues. But at this point, it is a market-based with a range of products. Maybe Jacob can jump in and fill in the details.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Just to build on Dan's point, we did discuss housing affordability in this neighborhood. Obviously, like you mentioned, Councillor, it's a very desirable neighborhood to live in. There's a lot of people who are attracted to this area for the amenities and the space provided. You're going to have larger units within the major or within the 2 12-story buildings, but in those low-rise buildings, which I believe we're currently at about 17 units. Again, we don't have a site plan, so this can all be further refined, but low-rise wood frame construction allows for better constructability and perhaps lower rents geared towards bigger units. So they are not necessarily deemed affordable under the terms of affordable housing. I know that's kind of a shifting definition and we need to nail it down at the city level. But this is a market project, but we are including low-rise wood frame construction buildings with larger units that, depending on financing initiatives and labor costs and material costs as things evolve, it's kind of a weird time right now. We believe those units could be more affordable than putting larger units in high-rise buildings where construction costs are a little higher.
Yeah. I'll wrap up in a little bit, obviously, but I think this could have been a different discussion that could even have had my support had there been that real effort to make sure that people other than the most affluent in Ottawa would be able to afford to be able to live in a place like this. Once again, we have a transit station in Westboro, next to which only the most affluent are going to be able to afford to live, and I think that's a shame. The gentrification of Westboro is something that absolutely keeps me up at night. It's such a wonderful neighborhood, and it's becoming more and more exclusive all the time. And there could have been it could have been a different discussion with that nod to affordable housing. I disagree. Sorry, I'll wrap up later. Please make sure that everything that your tenants do is geared toward getting them onto bikes, and that means having the appropriate storage for those and the longest possible period of incenting them to use transit by buying them a bus pass. Chair, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Leeper. I did see Emily Myers' hand go up in response to one of your questions. Emily?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to clarify or at least make an additional point. I hear Councillor Leeper's last comments and with great emphasis on how, you know, maybe this conversation could have gone differently had it been one that went down the road of affordable housing or affordability. You know, our argument is that we're offering a diverse product range and availability. I know that doesn't sit well all the time in the affordable conversation, but until affordable or affordability is really quantified, it's a hard thing for a developer to come back and even answer. But to be fair, the conversation with the developer, you know, it never really went down that path. It was so stuck on height. It was so stuck on an OMB ruling. And so a constructive conversation was, or an opportunity for one was missed. So I just wanted to point out that I find it unfair at this time in front of this committee to make that point. I just wanted to defend the fact that I feel the conversation never evolved to that, to be frank. It got really bogged down in height and an OMB ruling. And so, you know, perhaps a lesson learned here, but I just wanted to emphasize that I feel that, you know, we didn't have the opportunity to sit down and really have that negotiation or conversation, you know, through this process. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Leeper, any other questions? Okay. Any questions from other committee members? Dan, I see your hand up. I mean, you've already had a chance to respond. So is there a different issue or any kind of correction or clarification? I can give you a couple seconds here.
Yeah, just a couple seconds. Thanks for giving me a minute. I just want to say we really listened to the community here. We came down from 18 and 21 to 12. You know, we spent a lot of time and thought. You know, Barry articulated the transition points that negates the height, but maybe what you don't know is that there are a couple of constraints on this site, apart from that OMB decision. One was an easement that was put on us on the north property line. And one of the big things we kept hearing from the community is they wanted access through to the MUP. Right at that intersection of Winston and Wilmot, people have, you know, told us many times they want access through there to the MUP. So we maintained that. So the footprint is somewhat, you know, fixed. We had to go up and we handled it as best we could. So you may not be aware of that, but if we did follow the 7.5-story OMB decision, you would have significantly less units density on this site, right beside the LRT station. And, you know, and also earlier in the presentation, somebody had made a reference. I'll just finish.
And I'm going to actually stop you there because at this point you're not responding to questions from councillors and just our process of committee. I'll stop you there, but thank you to everyone from your team for the answers today. We're going to move to questions for staff. So I know there's a few from different committee members. So any questions from staff? Or questions for staff? Councillor Leeper, lead us off.
Thanks. I'm happy to let any of my colleagues go ahead. No. So the big question I have as staff is actually I think it's site plan related, and it relates to the turnaround at the far west side of the site. But if the zoning is approved today as proposed, I believe that will be locked in. So the end of Roosevelt on the west side of the site proposes, I think, to even add asphalt in proximity to the multi-use path in order to accomplish a turnaround from the parking garage.
I do see that.
Yeah, so right now Roosevelt dead ends at the property or at the end of the right of way. So there is proposed now to extend Roosevelt over to the west, or sorry, not Roosevelt, but to create a turnaround in the right of way at the end of Roosevelt.
Correct.
Is that, if we approve the zoning today with the garage entrance where it is proposed, does that lock in that turnaround?
Well, I'm presently looking at the site plan. I'm looking at the location of the ramp and the turnabout that you're referring, and there's quite a distance in between the two. So I do see wiggle room there for adjustment at site plan.
I think that's going to be critical because, again, we're proposing to approve this building on the basis of the arterial equivalent, if I can put it that way, transportation infrastructure by having the MUP there, and having that turnaround there is going to, I would suggest, compromise our ability to create a wider MUP. Compromise the feeling of that MUP. So that's a discussion I'll be very keen to get into with you at the site plan phase. The other question I had was language that I saw in the recommendation to approve this that speaks to, yeah, we're moving from a mid-rise to a high-rise, but it's a low high-rise. Is low high-rise a category that we've defined in the new official plan or in the previous one?
Doug, do you want to jump in? Or?
Well, thank you, Co-Chair Gower. I think the answer, I guess, the short answer would be you go from mid-rise to high-rise. But just taking a look at the transition that's been incorporated into the building as you just get into the high-rise area, it can say that it sort of approximates more of a low or mid-rise type development with that transition to make it more compatible. But I guess the short answer is no in terms of definitions.
Yeah, so this this low high rise, I guess I just caution my colleagues around the table who are going to be in the position of needing to talk to their residents about secondary plans and about what the official plan means, that, you know, there's this wriggle room. It's, you know, the plan may speak to a mid-rise, but staff may be willing to contemplate things that are taller than mid-rise if it's mid-rise like. The low high-rise category is something that we're sort of seeing here. I think that's going to create a precedent, and before you approve this or before you vote in favor of this zoning, just keep that in mind, that, you know, this is opening the door further. And folks, I think if we were having, do you mind if I wrap up? I don't know if anyone has any questions, staff.
I had one quick question I was going to ask to Tim Mark before you wrap up. And it's just around, there was an OMB ruling, I guess it's 8 years ago now. It was just one of the delegations sort of touched on this. Is what they're doing now, is this coming to us with a request for an amendment to the OPA and to the zoning bylaw? Are they allowed to do that despite the fact that the previous OMB decision said, you know, 8 stories is the maximum? Is there anything that's out of the ordinary for what they're doing here and asking for this amendment?
Well, Mr. Chair, we don't see all the time applications where there's been a past OMB ruling, but it is to remember that in the same way that council has to deal with applications as they come before, and so if there's a council decision 8 years ago, that does not stop someone from applying today. The same applies to OMB rulings. And the example, the one that comes to mind, and only Mayor Watson and Councillor Deans would have been around then, was the Palladium. The Palladium decision in 1991, the OMB said there can't be any expansion in that area for 25 years. And the region, as it then was, says, we can't see that. One is always entitled to reply. And that was immediately after the OMB had made a decision. So in the same way that someone can reapply after the Committee of Adjustment or Council has made a decision, the same is true after an OLT decision.
Okay, and a follow-up then. I think one of the resident delegations said they would consider an appeal to this if we were to approve it today. Would the tribunal today be looking at the previous OMB decision, our current official plan and secondary plans, some mix of the two? Like what would be relevant in terms of planning policy and previous decisions in a tribunal review.
Okay, so what is relevant is the current planning policy. So one of the delegations noted that there has been 2 subsequent provincial policy statements since the time of the original decision. So it is the current provincial policy, the in-force official plan that the tribunal will primarily look to. Will it allow comment on the past OMB decision? I'm certain that the tribunal will allow comment on the past OMB decision.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Councillor Leeper, do you want to wrap up?
Thank you. And colleagues, obviously I'm the local councillor, and I'm going to support my residents in asking you to reject this application. We wouldn't be having this discussion today if this was constrained to the mid-rise form as the OMB decision asked for. You know, the developer could have moved ahead with site plan and pulled a building permit. But they've chosen not to. The justification for moving from a mid-rise to a high-rise is that this is on 2 major pieces of transportation infrastructure. Ordinarily, we put height on arterial roads, which is, you know, the transportation infrastructure that is able to handle a large number of cars. And this development proposes a large number of cars, 254 of them in the parking spots. Putting it on a MUP and transit would require that we actually see some sort of effort to indicate that that's going to be the primary means by which people travel around. And you know, I'm looking at the zoning amendment to have the parking ratio be 1 per unit, and that's clearly inadequate in order to take care. And I don't have a lot of confidence that, you know, this is going to be truly tied into our cycling infrastructure. This is the kind of density and transportation impact that our official plan drives to the edge of neighborhoods. And I accept the neighbor's argument that this is not the edge of the neighborhood, that this is on the interior of the neighborhood. This is, I have to give you planning grounds upon which to reject this. And I think that this is key planning grounds upon which to reject this, that moving from the mid to the high rise on the basis of transportation infrastructure is inadequately demonstrated in this project, and that we are diverging too far away from our own official plan policies with respect to putting heights and density at the edge of neighborhoods. I am sorry that we couldn't find a way to make this work at an 8+8. I think that this building could have moved ahead much sooner had they wanted to move ahead according to what the OMB told them they could, but here we are. The community worked hard to win that OMB decision. And I'm asking you to support the work that they did, the expense to which they went just a few years ago on the planning grounds of where this development is located. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions or comments before we go to a vote? Okay, seeing none. So we're going to do a recorded vote for this. So Kelly, if we get your assistance on the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment and report recommendations for 335 and 339 Roosevelt Avenue, 344 Winston, and 379 and 389 Wilmot Avenue.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Cloutier,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
Yes.
Councillor Hughley,
Yes.
Councillor Kitts,
Yes.
Councillor Leeper,
No.
Councillor Menard, Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Chair Moffat,
Yes.
and Chair Gower.
Yes.
1 nay, 9 yeas.
Okay, thanks everyone for the discussion on this item. The next item that we held was number 4, zoning bylaw amendment for 982, 986 Francis Street in Rito, Rockliffe. We'll follow the same process we did for the last item. We have a short presentation from Kimberly Baldwin, who's the planner for this file, and then we'll go to the applicants for a short presentation, and then we have 2 delegations registered as well. Good morning, Kimberly. Don't see Kimberly yet on the screen, but I know she is here. Oh, hi. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can bring a presentation up on the screen. That's actually the applicant's presentation, so perhaps there's some confusion there. If the applicant would like to make a presentation, staff do not need to in this instance.
Okay, well, with committee's concurrence, we can waive the staff presentation and go right to the applicant. I see a lot of nodding heads, so yeah. So for the applicant, we have Paul Robinson, who's here. Good morning, Paul.
Morning, everybody.
Whenever you're ready, you can begin. We'll get your presentation back up on the screen.
Thank you. So this is the title page. Thank you very much. So next slide, please. So the property is at 982 and 986 Francis, which is outlined in green on the image you see. About 70 meters to the north is Donald Street. The 2 properties are single family homes at the present time. They are owned now by an entity affiliated with the school, which is immediately to the west, which is to the left of the green outlined images. And then to the south of the school is another property that is in an I-1A zone. And that is a church property. To the east are primarily single family homes. So the proposal before you, and if you go to the next page, please. Thank you very much. So the colored area is the area that's subject to the zoning application. And it's a site-specific zoning application to allow 1 additional permitted use for the property, and it is to allow a daycare facility for the property, and to also allow for some modifications to the parking arrangements for the daycare. The school is in below and slightly to the left, and the daycare and the school are going to be connected. And as you can see, there's some canopies that reach almost to the property lines between the 2 properties that will allow the children that are in the daycare facility to go towards the school facility. And the parking and drop-off and pickup will be on the right-hand side of the image where you see a drop-off for the school. So the children will be dropped off there, and then they will walk along to your left, and then they will go into the rear of the daycare facility. There is going to also be a connecting piece of construction between the 2 homes to make 1 continuous daycare facility. The properties right now each have their own driveway access. On the left-hand side, which is 982 Francis, the proposal calls for some additional fencing along the property line between this property and the property to the north, which I believe is 978 Francis, and as well to close off that driveway and to also put some hedging along the street edge so that that can't be used as a driveway. And on the right-hand side of the colored component of this drawing, it shows 2 cars. Those will be 2 parking spaces to be used by the daycare employees. Those are existing. It's a nice interlocking driveway. And then on the remainder of the school property, there's 2 parking spaces are assigned for the daycare facility, because the daycare facility requires 4 parking spaces. There's also at the bottom left of the image is a detail of the type of fencing that is proposed along the north property line. The people associated with this project have met with that property owner about the fencing and the landscaping, and that is to his agreement. Next slide, please. This is a bird's eye view site plan of what is being proposed on 982 and 986 Francis, with 982 being on the left-hand side. These are both existing homes. And then there's going to be a connecting addition in between to make it one continuous building. And then a walkway that's covered going to the rear of the property, which is the mutual property line with the school facility. So it's going to be total gross floor area of about 3,800 square feet. And we're asking for your support today. We have a recommendation for approval by the planning department, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. We will come back to you for questions in a few moments. We will go to our delegations next. So first delegation is Serge René from the Saint Sebastian Parish. Bienvenue, Serge. I'm looking for Serge on my screen.
He's there now. I think he just needs to unmute, I think.
Okay. Well, let's do this. I do see Pierre, who's our second speaker on the screen. So why don't we begin with Pierre? Bienvenue, Pierre. Vous avez 5 minutes pour votre présentation, si tu es prêt à commencer.
Mais je suis ici, moi.
Oh,
Allô?
oui, on a Serge. Okay.
Oui.
Pierre, un instant, on commence avec Serge.
Alors, bon, d'accord. Alors,
oui.
je suis ici.
Et nous pouvons t'entendre. Alors, Serge, commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Okay, I'll do it in English. Thank you. On this zoning bylaw amendment, I am representing Father Jean-Pierre Fredette, the parish priest for Saint-Sébastien, which is a next door building of l'Académie Providence. Our comments were submitted to the committee last Tuesday. My intervention today is to add to and clarify some of the comments. I first refer to the report prepared by the firm P.H. Robinson, which is a document you specifically consider towards the approval of this zoning bylaw amendment. On page 11 of the report, we read, and I quote, "Issues such as accommodation of parking and access are prominent considerations when assessing the relationship between new and existing development." We also read, "Parents of the children using the daycare will use the existing drop-off pickup area on the 998 France property that has an existing daycare." At this point, I would like to clarify that to access 998 France property, one has to drive on the north parking area of the parish church located at 1000 France. Secondly, I refer to the traffic impact overview produced by the municipality of Ottawa on February 11, 2005, for the first addition to the primary school, which stated that the trip generation rates would be 39 vehicles at rush hour, with no significant expected effect on the level of service for the France Street, Donald Street intersection. With these two statements that I just quoted, allow me to read 3 of the 8 comments that were sent to the committee 2 days ago. Surveys were conducted which determined that a grand total of 120 vehicles accessed the north parking lot of the church during morning and after rush hours. In addition, approximately 20 vehicles allow themselves daily access to the south parking lot of the church during these periods, waiting for children heading to or returning from L'Académie Providence. In addition to the 25 parking spaces occupied by the staff of the Academy, it goes without saying that the area of these parking lots cannot accommodate such vehicle traffic in a limited time. It must also be taken into account that with so many vehicles in this small space, there is a serious possibility of accidents. The new addition will welcome 72 additional children. It is obvious that there will be an increase in traffic, which will not improve the current situation, will worsen it, as a matter of fact. In the report prepared by the firm P.H. Robinson, the issue of circulation in the context of building access has definitely not been addressed, despite the fact that in this report, he wrote that accommodation of parking and access are a prominent consideration when assessing the relationship between new and existing development. The municipality of Ottawa needs to revisit the 2005 traffic impact overview because the trip generation rates evaluated then at 39 is now exceeding 140. Now, on another aspect of the P.H. Robinson's report, it states that 2 of the 4 required parking spaces are available at 998 France, the existing Académie Providence. This is wrong because presently the staff from the Academy are overflowing their parking space requirement on the church north parking area. Obviously, there is no more parking spaces available for the Academy, contrary to the report. These items and the other ones raised on the comments already forwarded to you must be taken into serious consideration before the completion of the new addition to L'Académie Providence, because the critical situation we are currently experiencing will only get worse if no proper decision is taken before the completion of this project. Thank you for allowing us to provide written and verbal comments. This ends my verbal input.
Merci, Serge. Thank you. And you are right on time for the 5 minutes. Are there any questions from committee members? I'm seeing none, although perhaps later on in our discussion with staff, the traffic issue and parking issues may arise. Our second speaker is Pierre Tabay. Pierre, you're with us? Yes.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm gonna coordinate with Paul, our planner. Where is Paul? Paul is still with us?
Paul is here, although he won't be able to address you directly. So if you have comments, you can make comments, and then our committee members will have an answer.
Roughly, maybe a picture is better than a lot of words. Can we share our documents, or can we have a permission to share it?
Kelly, is there a presentation for Mr. Tabay?
Are you referring to the presentation that Paul spoke to?
The site plan map. Maybe if we could bring up the site plan map. I think that's what Pierre may be looking for.
Yeah, maybe Kimberly, can you share maybe the 3D views to show everybody what kind of...
Just bear with us for a minute, Chair. I don't believe I received that presentation, but we can give Kimberly permissions to share her screen.
Pardon me, Kelly, I was just referring to the slide that Paul used for most of his presentation. It had a map of the, an overhead map view.
Perhaps slide 3 of the applicant's presentation. That might be one for the architect to refer to.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pierre, so Pierre, if you could
we have many other views. Anyhow, we have a site agreement already done maybe 15 years ago with the city and the neighbor regarding the circulation in the common parking space. So there is a loading area, drop-off area here, which is already done and working very well. And we have the required parking spots. So we are conform to the requirement of the city in regard of the number of parking spots. And for sure, if it's school, sometimes we have peak hours in the morning and in the afternoon. But in the rest of the time, the parking is working very, very well. And even on peak hours, is completely under control. Now, we might have maybe some more needs, but will not affect the property of our neighbors. So if there are some other cars which will need to be parked, we'll find another place for that, or we will find a solution with our daycare employees to share their to share the pour faire un partage un covoiturage. On the other side, the pedestrian circulation is doing very well. So we have a main entrance serving both the daycare and the existing school. We have a lot of green space. We have all the required amenity areas for that. And we hope for the need of the community and the school and for everybody around to provide this required service, because there is a big need for daycares in the area. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. Merci. There's two councillors with questions for you. Councillor Leeper is first.
Thank you very much. And I apologize. I missed, I think Kimberly gave an overview of this at the very start, and I had to deke away from my desk for a moment. I just want to make sure I understand this properly. There's a property that the school now owns that is going to be converted into a daycare, and it has access to the parking lot that is associated with the school, so that if people are dropping off, there's the potential to use that parking lot. In other words, this is sort of this is an integrated campus of sorts that has that large parking lot that's available.
Sorry if this is a question addressed to me. Yes, they are sharing this parking. So the school, the time, the peak time for the school is early in the morning and late in the afternoon. And the church is usually in the weekends. Okay. And in the weekends, the school is closed.
So the church has some, they share that parking lot then?
Yeah, okay. They share the parking lot. The north side is for the church, and they have another parking lot too. And the south side is for the school. Now they might have some, how do you call it? Like during the day, the funérailles. So they might use the parking, but otherwise it's just the weekend.
Yeah, okay. I'm crystal clear. Thank you very much.
And the weekend, the school is closed.
Yeah.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I just really had a question around traffic management and just how that will work during drop off and pickup. That's just the number one concern that I've heard from neighbors. I actually do applaud the applicant for their consultation with the abutting neighbor on the fence. I actually sat down more than a year ago in a backyard, looking at that property, looking at where the fence would be put in with those neighbors, and those neighbors seem to be satisfied with that. But the continuing concern from the residents that I've heard from has been traffic congestion, the risk of traffic congestion. So I'm just wondering, what does the management look like of the daycare's drop off and pickup once the building is in operation?
They will have a person in charge in the morning to help receive the kids. But on the other side, the parking was managed and planned with the city of Ottawa to make sure that the drop-off area and the rotation of the cars are conform to the state of the art in regard of the planning, and so everything is conform to the norm. They can turn around very smoothly. They can park their car according to all parking requirement and the dimensions stated. And for sure, in the morning, there is a little bit rush, but everything is under control. And we will have some, as I told you, some persons to receive the kids to make sure that the car don't delay and don't stay too long and make a kind of a waiting cars one behind the other.
Well, I'm happy that there's going to be a commitment to that type of traffic management, which would obviously be necessary for daycare. And, I can assure you that the city, along with the councillor's office, will continue to monitor this scenario if this application is successful, to make fine adjustments if necessary for traffic management, because we've just heard that very clearly, and that seems to be the major concern. So thank you so much for your answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And the sisters are concerned, and they are looking forward for new development. So they are buying property around, and at the first occasion, we can release a little bit this parking. We're going to do it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor, and merci, Pierre. We have gotten a little bit out of sequence here. Obviously, Pierre and Paul were both representing the applicant in this case. Are there any other questions from committee members for Paul or Pierre, the applicant group in this case? Okay, I'm seeing none. We'll move to questions from staff. Are there any remaining questions for staff on this? Okay, I'm seeing none. So thank you everyone for your contributions to the conversation. Councillor King, did you have any final comments before we wrap?
I just wanted to assure the community that I'm going to continue to work with neighbors around traffic congestion. We're going to continue to work with the nuns and the school to ensure that if there are any challenges, that there are interventions, whether those are from citywide traffic budgets or temporary traffic calming measures budgets from the ward councillor's office. Generally, in terms of observations, this is a better solution than a tear down and a buildup of a more institutional looking building on that street. Ultimately, I think it is a good example of adaptive reuse. So those bungalows remain. They're utilized by the school, and I think that it's less impactful than other applications that I'm sure come before planning committee in a sense. So I'm fine with the trajectory of this, and we will be monitoring the traffic situation very carefully. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Sounds like very similar to, I think, what many of us are experiencing at schools in every ward, which is a lot more parents choosing to drive their kids to schools for a number of reasons, and probably exasperated by pandemic and bus cancellations and not a good situation for traffic safety in your schools these days. I don't think we need a recorded vote for this. On the zoning bylaw amendment for 982 and 986 Francis Street, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
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 Carried. Okay, thank you. So moving on to our agenda, those were all of the held items. So next is notices of motions for consideration at a subsequent meeting. And there is one that Co-Chair Moffat is going to introduce.
Yes, thank you. It's a notice of motion regarding a technical amendment for a front-ending report, preliminary design of the Litrium Road Bank Street intersection improvements and the Bank Street widening south of Litrium Road to Dunskipper Drive. Dunskipper is a butterfly, for those who didn't know. So that's. I'll just read the an element of the resolution because it is just a notice of motion. So it's deleting a reference to the Leitrim Landowners Group in recommendations 1 through 3 inclusive and replacing with Pathways South Regional Incorporated, Leitrim South Holdings Incorporated, Finley Creek Partnership comprised of Finley Creek Properties South and numbered company, Barrett Co-tenancy. You can see it, it's on the screen. There's a bunch of stuff here. It's a notice of motion, so I can read it in its entirety when it comes back next meeting.
All right, thank you, Co-Chair Moffat. We'll consider that at the next meeting. Are there any other notices of motion? Okay, there are no in-camera items today. Are there any inquiries? Any other businesses? Any other business, rather? All right, then we are adjourned. Our next meeting is Thursday, May 12th. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.